Hey there! Welcome back to the Exploring Thought podcast. This episode is going to be about critical thinking. In my opinion, critical thinking is one of the most important things, especially when it comes to exploring thought. And it seems to me like a good subject to start out with after the introduction episode. Critical thinking has been defined in various ways by different groups and people. One description is the, quote, objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. To me, it sort of means to think for yourself and in an effective manner. And we could debate about what an effective manner is, though I think it's a bit subjective. Regardless of the specific metric or where your exact cutoff point might be, I think critical thinking is displayed in many ways. Some of the key ones, in my opinion, are being able to see through trickery, illusion, or just plain wrong and inaccurate data. This is a case where I would tend to suggest quality over quantity. People sure can learn a lot of things, but what if many of those things aren't true? And in a world so full of deception and just downright ineptitude, many are walking around with a lot of false information that others have set up for them, whether intentionally or not. The best way in many cases is probably personal experience and understanding how something works pragmatically, though a lot can be inferred as well. Neglecting your ability to gauge veracity can be a dangerous thing. You could believe almost anything if you didn't have the critical thinking skills to flesh out the details. A lot of people think they know a lot more than they do. I often see others posting info or links on social media that I know aren't true because I did deeper research. To be fair though, I make mistakes from time to time here as well. Every so often I share something without looking into it deeper. Though if I find out something I shared isn't true, I address my mistake and apologize, either in person or to anyone who follows me on social media where I shared the false info. Being able to make mistakes and admit it when such happens is an important part of learning and growing and critical thinking from what I've seen. If you can't even admit to being wrong, how much can you really learn? Being wrong is often a very important part of the learning process. There are many people out there who mean well, yet are sharing false information. So, if you want to try to avoid making that mistake, I would advocate that you spend more time researching the details of something before you share it. One of the best pieces of advice I can give in regards to this, and in general, is to check numerous sources if possible. Also, research the opposing viewpoints. You can often learn a lot from the critics and those who disagree with something, especially as they are oftentimes looking for fault. Then when you have all the different sides of the story, or as many as you can get, you can combine it all into a bigger picture. I've found from my personal experience that it seems like the truth is often somewhere in the middle of the major arguments, especially when it comes to politics. Or sometimes it's fringe and seen as weird or crazy by the majority, and this can be a case for avoiding the fallacy of not believing something because a majority does, or because any number of other people believe it or disagree with it. I think you should believe something because it makes sense to you, not because any certain amount of other people agree or disagree, but just because it makes sense to you. Another fallacy is when you appeal to authority and claim something is right or wrong or a specific way just because someone or some group of experienced or knowledgeable people who are so-called experts or authorities in a field say so. I would argue that something is true because it's true, not because some doctor or scientist or priest or politician or whoever says so. To take the point a little further, I think it is ideal when you know the subject matter for yourself, and you don't just believe or claim something is so because someone else says so. There are whole collections and lists out there of logical fallacies, and I would highly suggest going through some of them sometime and just thinking about them. Certain principles can make such a huge difference in regard to critical thinking and how we understand reality. For example, the saying, correlation does not imply causation, is significant, and many people will claim something is true because it's linked or connected somehow. But just because things are linked or connected somehow does not mean that one of those things is directly causing the other. You can go around learning about all the different conspiracy theories, religions, sciences, and so on, and think you know a whole bunch of stuff, and you do, but without a proper filter, you're going to be essentially filling yourself full of a lot of viruses and inaccurate data, and some of it can even be potentially harmful. In my opinion, we have an epidemic of false teachers, false preachers, and false prophets. Sometimes it's because they want to exploit others, and sometimes they just didn't do the due diligence to determine if that information they were sharing was true or not, or even to preface it with a disclaimer of potentiality. They just claim it as true. Or there could be other reasons too, but it sure can be pretty difficult to figure out sometimes. This is one of the biggest issues I've seen in my journey to try to find the truth. It's that there's countless people out there spreading false information, thinking it is true or not distinctly labeling it as a potential truth. I think it's likely worse than ever, and you can find it in virtually every subject like science, health, religion, politics, and the list goes on. Seriously, how do you truly know something is true? How can you prove it? Just because it's science doesn't mean you're right. Likewise, just because the Bible or a priest says it doesn't mean it's true. And just because someone in a suit who works for the government or whoever says it doesn't mean it's true either. There is a ton of fake and false science out there. The word science itself appears to be etymologically linked to knowledge. So we have both good forms of knowledge and bad forms of knowledge. Good forms of science and bad forms of science. Sort of like good dreams and bad dreams, which are basically pictures or symbols in the mind that may or may not be true. And yes, there is a subjectivity to good and bad, but hopefully you get what I mean. A decent amount of what is often passed off as science is not much different than religious belief, and science itself has basically become a religion for many. For example, like where some refuse to entertain certain things that a peer-reviewed study can't address, or cling to certain results even though they may be inaccurate. These days you can essentially find a study to prove almost anything if you have a strong enough confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is something we should probably talk about as well. The online dictionary I used says, confirmation bias is, quote, the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. I think this is an area many people fall into unintentionally. Heck, I still do sometimes and I'm aware of it. It can be a difficult one. I think many of us, myself included, tend to want to think we know things based on our background with a given subject, or based on what we learned in the past. Some of us seem to think we're almost always right, and that we know what's really going on. though I believe it would likely be wise to try to stay open to the possibilities. Also, exploring subjects like metacognition and mindfulness could be very helpful as well. Try to see things for what they really are as opposed to what you would either like them to be or like them not to be. Regardless of how you would prefer things, just try to see things as they are to the best of your ability, as a significant way to push back against confirmation bias. Becoming aware of the confirmation bias in yourself can be very powerful. Trying to get to the truth, regardless of how you would personally like it to be, is, I think, ideal much, if not most of the time. The ability to look through the data and to try to understand what it really means is major. Once again, critical thinking is so important. So many forces are at work to try to control and shape your mind. You have a valuable mind. We all do. If someone tells you that you're going to burn in hell forever for not obeying, replicating, and living their style of decree, then you could submit to the fear of that threat, or you can critically think about it for a while and realize they don't have the ability to prove such a claim. One person might succumb to fear and lose part of their individuality for the rest of their lives and become a slave to that mindset, and another might simply shrug it off and not be bothered at all because of doing the time thinking critically about the subject and realizing the claim was baseless. Also, one of the other big ones is government. And since distrust of government is probably at a sort of all-time high, I'm sure I don't need to tell you to be on guard there, and you know. However, some people look at government as pretty much their god. Whatever the government says, that's the gospel truth and it should be obeyed. But truth does not come from government. If it doesn't make sense to your mind, intuition, and your heart, then I would argue that your duty comes to yourself first, not any other person or group of people. I would hope we would agree that being yourself is one of the most important things. What would existence really be like if you couldn't even be yourself? So to me, thinking critically allows me to, in my opinion, filter information much more effectively and get deeper into the truth of a given matter, and by extension, get deeper into who I am as well. Paying more attention to what I learn about and how I learn helps me change my perception of myself and who I am to an extent. I would suggest that critical thinking helps us discover who we really are more and what the world around us really is more, and I think that's extremely valuable. I want to mention the concept of a burden of proof as well. Oftentimes in arguments or discussions, one side will ask for proof of a claim that has been made by the other side, and then the other side will try to flip it and try to suggest the alternate side has to disprove said claim. However, it is the job of the individual or group who is making a claim to prove it and no one else. So if you make a claim, you should be prepared to try to prove it and not try to shift that responsibility to anyone else. And if anyone tries to make you disprove a claim they have made, you can tell them that that is not your job and that it's their obligation to prove the claim they have made. I see skepticism as a critical element too. A decent amount of skeptics get a bad name, and there are many who are sort of hardcore, toe-the-line, status quo types who have a particular agenda, which has led to some people going so far as to even think that skepticism is negative or bad in general. Yet, I think skepticism is vital. I believe that true skeptics question virtually everything and are open-minded to more possibilities, and I think skepticism is invaluable for critical thinking. The way I see it is, true skepticism is an effort to get to the truth, regardless of wherever that ends up leading. This is getting kind of long, and I'm sure there's a lot I missed or didn't get to, but this wasn't meant to be totally exhaustive or completely comprehensive by any means, and these were just some quick points I resonate with. You may have different thoughts on the subject, and I welcome that, though these are a few of my thoughts I wanted to share. This is such a big topic that I'm very passionate about. I'm likely going to have to make future episodes on the subject. Yet, I think this is a good start for now, and a good spot to end this episode, so thank you for stopping by and listening if you did. Now that I've shared my thoughts, I encourage you to share your thoughts if you want to. Feel free to drop a comment on whichever social media is best for you, or you can send an email to exploringthoughtpodcast@gmail.com. I'll do my best to respond if it's reasonable for me to do so and if I have the time and am able to. Thank you for your time, and bye until next time.